to slowly explore something quiet, cold, and strangely human. Imagine that instead of waking up in your own bed, with soft blankets, electric lights, and the distant hum of modern life outside your window, you wake up in Victorian England, not as royalty, not as a wealthy merchant or noble surrounded by fireplaces and silk curtains, but as someone ordinary, someone poor, someone living in the crowded streets of London, or Manchester, or Liverpool, during the long grey years of the 19th century. So, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, or settle a little deeper into your pillow, and for the next while, let the modern world drift softly away. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from tonight. Maybe rain is tapping softly against your window. Maybe the room is dark except for a small lamp nearby. Maybe it's very late, and the world already feels quieter than usual. There's something strangely comforting about imagining old lives at night. The soft repetition of routines, the creaking wooden floorboards, the glow of candlelight reflecting against fogged windows, the distant sound of carriage wheels echoing through wet cobblestone streets. And Victorian England, especially before sunrise, must have felt almost dreamlike, cold, dim, endlessly smoky. You open your eyes slowly. The first thing you notice is the air, heavy, a little damp. The room smells faintly of soot, old fabric, coal smoke, and rainwater dried into wood. Your bed is small, not the thick, soft mattress people often imagine when they think of the past, but a thin straw mattress resting against rough wooden boards. Sometimes entire families shared one room. Sometimes several people shared one bed. Privacy, for the poor, was rare, and silence almost never existed. Even now, before dawn, you can hear the city breathing around you, coughing somewhere downstairs, a baby crying through the wall, footsteps overhead, the distant rattling of wagon wheels outside, the soft drip of rain through weak roofing. Victorian cities were loud in a completely different way than modern cities. No engines, no phones, no televisions. Instead, everything sounded mechanical, human, alive. Factories hissed through the night. Horse hooves struck wet stone streets. Steam drifted from pipes. Street vendors shouted in the mornings. Church bells echoed constantly across neighborhoods wrapped in fog. And London fog, especially during the Industrial Revolution, was unlike modern fog at all. It mixed with smoke from thousands of coal fires, factories, homes, train engines. Everything burned coal. The result was a thick, smoky haze people called pea soup fog. Sometimes it became so dense, people could barely see a few feet ahead. Street lamps glowed weakly through the darkness like tiny floating moons. And strangely, despite how difficult life could be, there are moments that feel deeply familiar. People still walk slowly, still stretched to sleep from their eyes, still dreaded long workdays, still found comfort in long drinks, small conversations, and tiny peaceful moments before the world became busy. Human beings have always searched for softness, even in hard times, especially The streets feel wet and cold beneath your shoes. Rows of brick buildings disappear softly into fog. Laundry hangs overhead between windows. A woman nearby sells hot chestnuts from a small street cart, the warmth drifting into the freezing air. And everywhere, there are people moving, workers carrying lunch tins, factory girls walking together quietly, newsboys shouting headlines, dock workers heading toward the river. Victorian cities were crowded beyond what most modern people imagine. Entire families often lived in one room. Poorer districts overflowed with noise, smoke, and endless movement. But strangely, many Victorian writers described nighttime as peaceful, especially late at night, after factories slowed, after taverns emptied, after rain settled dust into the streets. There's something timeless about cities after midnight. Even now, modern apartment buildings sometimes feel similar. The soft hum of distant life, a few glowing windows, someone awake somewhere else in the darkness. And perhaps that's why old photographs of Victorian streets feel oddly emotional. They capture ordinary people, crossing roads, standing outside shops, leaning against walls, never imagining someone centuries later would quietly wonder what their lives felt like. By afternoon, work becomes repetitive. Factories during the Industrial Revolution often relied on rhythm, the same movements repeated endlessly, machines clattering constantly. Cotton mills especially were deafening. Workers sometimes communicated through gestures because the machines were too loud for conversation. And yet, many people adjusted surprisingly quickly. Human beings become accustomed to almost anything when repetition takes over. There's a psychology to repetitive work that feels strangely calming to think about late at night. The mind drifts, thoughts wander, people imagine better futures, or remember small things, or simply focus on surviving the day. And throughout history, ordinary people often found comfort in rituals, tea breaks, shared meals, walking home familiar streets, lighting candles at night, listening to rain against windows. Small, predictable moments make difficult lives feel manageable. As evening slowly approaches, gas lamps begin glowing across the city. Victorian evenings must have looked beautiful from a distance. Warm yellow lights reflected against rain-soaked cobblestones. Fog drifting slowly beneath street lanterns. Train stations glowing softly in the dark. Steam rising from iron engines. There's something deeply cozy about old train stations at night. The echoing announcements, the heavy ticking clocks, passengers waiting quietly beneath dim lights. Victorian England was one of the first places where rail travel transformed ordinary life. Suddenly, people could move farther than ever before. Small villages connected to giant cities. Letters arrived faster. Newspapers spread ideas rapidly. The modern world quietly began forming beneath soot-covered skies. And despite the hardships, many people still found wonder in ordinary things. Music halls, cheap novels, public parks, libraries, rain against windows while sitting beside candlelight. Even during difficult centuries, people still searched for beauty. Perhaps that never changes. Eventually, night settles over the city again. We return home slowly through damp streets, glowing amber beneath gas lamps. The room feels cold at first, quiet, tired. Someone nearby boils water for tea. Another person mends clothing near weak candlelight. And outside, rain continues softly against rooftops. Victorian evenings often ended early simply because darkness changed everything. Before widespread electricity, night truly felt like night. Rooms became smaller, voices softened,
People go sleeping earlier. Families sat close together for warmth and light. And maybe that slower rhythm is part of why imagining the Victorian world feels strangely calming now. Life was harder in countless ways, but time itself sometimes moved differently, more slowly, more quietly. People walked more, waited more, sat beside windows more, watched weather more carefully, and perhaps, in our own strange modern way, that's what so many cozy nighttime videos try to recreate. A slower feeling, a softer rhythm, a small escape from noise. So tonight, as rain taps softly somewhere outside, and distant lights glow quietly in the dark, we drift slowly back from Victorian England, from smoky streets, warm tea, foggy train stations, and flickering gas lamps, carrying with you the strange, comforting reminder that ordinary people throughout history, even in difficult times, still searched for warmth, still searched for calm, still searched for small, beautiful moments at the end of long days. And somehow, that feels timeless.
And as the night grows deeper, Victorian England begins to feel quieter, not silent, never fully silent, but softer somehow. The factories slow, the streets empty little by little. Rainwater gathers in uneven cobblestones, reflecting pale gaslight like melted gold. And somewhere, far across the city, a clock tower slowly strikes midnight. You can almost hear the echo rolling through the fog. There's something strangely comforting about old cities at night, especially before electricity. Darkness used to feel heavier, more complete. Rooms glowed only where candles burned. Windows became tiny floating squares of amber light suspended inside endless black streets. And for many poorer families, nighttime was one of the only moments the world slowed down enough to breathe. You step carefully through a narrow alleyway. Laundry lines sway softly overhead in the wind. Rain drips quietly from rooftops. A cat slips silently between wooden crates near a bakery door. And somewhere nearby, someone is singing softly, not performing, not loudly, just humming to themselves while working late into the evening. Maybe sewing, maybe cleaning, maybe preparing bread dough for tomorrow morning. And suddenly, the city feels less frightening, more human. Victorian England is often remembered through tragedy and smoke and harsh factory life. But hidden quietly beneath all of that were millions of ordinary evenings, ordinary people making tea, ordinary people brushing dust from coats, ordinary people trying to stay warm while rain tapped softly against windows. History sometimes forgets those moments, but they mattered. They were real life. And perhaps those quiet moments are the most important parts to remember. Eventually, you arrive back at the small room you call home. The stairs creak beneath your feet. The hallway smells faintly of damp wood, soap, and coal smoke. Inside the room, a tiny fire burns weakly in the grate, not enough to fully warm the space, but enough to soften the cold a little. And strangely, after a long day outside, the room almost feels cozy. That's one of the quieter truths about human beings. Comfort is relative. Warmth becomes meaningful when you've spent all day cold. A small meal becomes comforting after hours of work. A shared laugh becomes memorable after exhaustion. Sometimes, the smallest things feel the most important. You sit near the fire slowly. Across the room, someone carefully darns holes in old socks by candlelight, needles moving in and out of fabric, slowly, rhythmically. The repetitive little motions almost feel hypnotic. And outside, the rain continues.
Victorian people spent enormous amounts of time repairing things, clothing especially. Fabric was valuable. Shoes were repaired again and again. Blankets were patched carefully. Nothing wasted if it could still survive another winter. And perhaps that's part of why old objects feel emotional now. A worn sleeve, a repaired teacup, a faded book with soft bent corners. Everything hollow someone once depended on it. Tonight's dinner was simple. Bread, tea, maybe a little stew if money has been good this week. And despite everything, despite the smoke, still a strange softness to the sound. The sound of spoons against bowls. The quiet crackling of wood firewood. Someone sighing sleepily nearby. Rain against glass. Human beings are remarkably good at creating comfort from very little. And late at night, both feel strangely emotional. As the hours drift onward, the city outside becomes quieter still. The taverns empty. The train stations calm. Even the horses seem slowly up. Fog thickens gently around distant gas lamps, and somewhere far away, a night watchman walks the streets carrying a lantern. Victorian cities have many strange nighttime jobs. Night watchmen, lamp lighters, factory stokers feeding coal into giant furnaces through the dark hours before dawn. Bakery workers beginning work while most of the city slept. Milk delivery workers preparing morning carts before sunrise. There's something comforting about imagining all these quiet, invisible lives happening at once. Tiny pockets of wakefulness scattered across sleeping cities. Even now, modern life still moves that way. Someone is always awake somewhere. A nurse, a cleaner, a student studying late at night beneath soft light, a stranger listening quietly to this video while rain falls outside. That's why nighttime can feel oddly intimate. The world shrinks, getting softer, more reflective, more honest somehow. Eventually, we begin preparing for sleep. Victorian bedtime rituals were often very simple. Candles extinguished carefully to save money. Shoes placed neatly beside beds. Layers of blankets arranged for warmth. Sometimes families shared stories quietly before sleeping.
Sometimes people simply sat in silence for a while, watching firelight move against walls. Without endless entertainment, people spent more time simply existing together, watching weather, thinking quietly, listening, and perhaps that slower rhythm is what feels so comforting to imagine now. The room grows darker. The final candle flickers weakly. Outside, rainwater runs gently through narrow streets. A train whistle echoes somewhere far beyond the fog, and beneath heavy blankets, the exhaustion of the day slowly settles into your body. Victorian England was difficult in countless ways, cold, demanding, uncertain, but even there, people still created tenderness, still shared warmth, still paused beside windows to watch snowfall, still smiled at neighbors, still carried tiny, beautiful routines through ordinary life. And maybe that's one of the quietest, comforting truths history can offer us. Human beings have always been human. Across every century, people searched for the same small things: warm rooms, gentle voices, soft light at the end of long days, the feeling of being safe enough to finally rest. So tonight, as your own room grows quieter and the modern world softens around you, you slowly drift away from Victorian England, from glowing gas lamps, foggy midnight streets, coal fires, tiny apartments, and rainy cobblestone roads, carrying with you one final comforting thought, that even in difficult times, people still found ways to make life feel gentle, and somehow, they always left little traces of that softness behind. By now, the city is deeply asleep. Not completely, never completely, but quieter than before. The kind of quiet that only exists very late at night. The kind where every small sound feels larger somehow. A carriage wheel in the distance, rain slipping softly through gutters, a floorboard creaking somewhere overhead, the faint whistle of wind moving between narrow brick streets, and beneath layers of blankets. You lie awake for a little while longer. Victorian nights were darker than most modern people can really imagine. Outside the small circle of candlelight, everything disappeared into shadow. Entire streets faded into blackness. And perhaps that's why candlelight felt so comforting then. Not decorative, not aesthetic, necessary. A single candle changed an entire room, softened fear, created warmth, turned tiny apartments into something gentler. Even now, there's something deeply calming about warm light at night. Fairy lights, desk lamps, the glow from windows during rainstorms. Human beings seem drawn to soft light instinctively, maybe because for most of history, light meant safety. You turn carefully beneath heavy blankets. The mattress rustles softly beneath you. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs in their sleep. Another person shifts quietly beneath layers of fabric. Families often slept close together in poor Victorian homes. Warmth mattered too much not to, despite the lack of privacy. There may have also been something comforting about never truly being alone. The soft sounds of other people breathing nearby. The reassurance that someone else was awake if storms grew loud outside. The quiet feeling of shared survival. Victorian life could feel lonely in many ways, especially in crowded cities, where people also depended on each other constantly. Neighbors were uncommon, shared meals, touched each other's children, passed along old clothing. People survived through tiny acts of cooperation, repeated quietly over and over again. The struggle sometimes felt the same heavily on suffering, but they accidentally forget tenderness existed too. But tenderness has always existed, in every century, even in smoke-covered factory cities, especially there. Outside, the rain finally begins slowing. Fog drifts lazily beneath distant gas lamps. And somewhere across London, a bakery has already begun preparing bread for morning. Victorian bakers often worked through the night. By sunrise, fresh bread would appear in shop windows while most of the city slowly woke again. There's something comforting about knowing that while some people slept, others quietly prepared tomorrow. Candles were replaced, coal fires relit, work deliveries arranged, train schedules prepared. The world continued softly to welcome the darkness. And perhaps that feeling still exists now, even tonight, somewhere while you listen. Someone is brewing coffee for early workers. Someone is stocking shelves in silence. Someone is cleaning empty hallways beneath fluorescent lights. The modern world still has invisible nighttime rhythms. We just notice them less. Victorian England noticed the night more carefully. Without constant noise and electric brightness, weather became important. Rain sounded louder. Footsteps carried farther. Snow transformed entire streets into silence. People paid attention to moonlight, to fog, to the sound of church bells through darkness. And perhaps that slower awareness of surroundings is part of why old worlds feel so atmospheric to imagine now. You slowly sit up for a moment. The room is freezing again. Most fires burned low overnight to save fuel. You wrap a blanket tighter around yourself and move quietly toward the tiny window. Outside, the city looks almost peaceful. Rows of dark rooftops disappear into pale mist. One lonely lantern glows near the street below. A stray cat pauses beneath it before vanishing into shadow. And for a brief second, Victorian London feels almost beautiful. Not glamorous, not easy, but beautiful in the soft, quiet way ordinary life sometimes becomes. There's a strange emotional feeling attached to old cities at night, perhaps because they remind us how many lives existed before us. Millions of people once stood beside these same windows, listened to rain against glass, watched fog drift through streets, worried about tomorrow, dreamed about better futures, felt tired, felt hopeful, felt lonely sometimes, and somehow, across centuries, those emotions still feel recognizable. The candle nearby flickers weakly. Its light moves softly across cracked walls and worn wooden furniture. Victorian rooms for the poor were often incredibly small, but people still decorated them when they could. Tiny framed pictures, pressed flowers, lace cloths carefully saved for special occasions. Even the poorest homes often contained little attempts at beauty, and perhaps that says something very gentle about human nature. People decorate spaces not only because life is easy, but because softness matters even more when life is difficult. Eventually, sleepiness begins settling over the room again. The city outside grows stiller. Even the rain has almost stopped now. Only the occasional drip from rooftops remains. You return slowly to bed. The blankets feel colder at first, then warmer little by little, and somewhere nearby, a clock quietly ticks through the darkness. Tick, tick, tick. There's something deeply comforting about old clocks at night. The slow repetition, the feeling that time itself is softened. Victorian life often moved according to bells and clocks, factory whistles, church towers, train schedules. Time became increasingly structured during the Industrial Revolution, and yet, late at night, time probably felt softer then too, less rushed, more spacious somehow. No glowing notifications, no endless scrolling, just darkness, rain, warmth, exhaustion settling gently into quiet waves. As your eyes slowly dreamed about better futures, felt tired, felt hopeful, felt lonely sometimes, and somehow, across centuries, those emotions still feel recognizable. The candle nearby flickers weakly. Its light moves softly across cracked walls and worn wooden furniture. Victorian rooms for the poor were often incredibly small, but people still decorated them when they could. Tiny framed pictures, pressed flowers, lace cloths carefully saved for special occasions. Even the poorest homes often contained little attempts at beauty. And perhaps that says something very gentle about human nature. People decorate spaces not only because life is easy, but because softness matters even more when life is difficult. Eventually, sleepiness begins settling over the room again. The city outside grows stiller. Even the rain has almost stopped now. Only the occasional drip from rooftops remains. You return slowly to bed. The blankets feel colder at first, then warmer little by little, and somewhere nearby, a clock quietly ticks through the darkness. Tick, tick, tick. There's something deeply comforting about old clocks at night. The slow repetition, the feeling that time itself has softened. Victorian life often moved according to bells and clocks, factory whistles, church towers, train schedules. Time became increasingly structured during the Industrial Revolution. And yet, late at night, time probably felt softer then too, less rushed, more spacious somehow. No glowing notifications, no endless scrolling, just darkness, rain, warmth, and exhaustion settling gently into quiet rooms. As your eyes slowly close, you imagine the city continuing beyond your tiny window. Foggy bridges crossing the Thames, empty train platforms glowing beneath weak lanterns, night watchmen carrying lamps through silent streets, factory chimneys resting briefly before dawn returns again, and tucked inside thousands of tiny apartments across Victorian England. Ordinary people sleep, workers, mothers, tailors, dock laborers, children curled beneath patched blankets, all carrying small private lives history would never fully record. They existed, and somehow, remembering ordinary people feels important. Not kings, not famous politicians, just quiet human beings trying to survive winters, share meals, find warmth, and rest at the end of long days. Perhaps that's why imagining the past can feel oddly emotional late at night, because underneath all the strange clothing, foggy streets, and candlelit rooms, people have always remained recognizable. And maybe that realization is comforting. So tonight, as your own room grows softer, and the distant sounds around you slowly fade, you drift gently away from Victorian England once more, from smoky rooftops, warm bread shops before dawn, tiny candlelit rooms, and endless rain-soaked streets, carrying with you the quiet reminder that even across centuries, human beings have always searched for peace at the end of the day, and perhaps, in some small, timeless way, we'll stay there alone. Slowly, very slowly, morning begins returning again, not suddenly, not brightly. Victorian mornings arrived softly through layers of fog and smoke, a pale gray light spreading quietly across rooftops and chimneys. You wake before the sun fully rises. Again, the room is cold enough that you hesitate before leaving the blankets. For a few quiet moments, you simply listen. Rainwater dripping outside, someone downstairs stoking a fire, a cart rattling faintly across distant cobblestones, and nearby, the gentle breathing of sleeping people still wrapped beneath heavy blankets. There's something strangely comforting about cities before dawn. Even now, the world feels unfinished somehow, gentler, less demanding. Victorian England must have had many moments like this. Small, peaceful pauses before factories roared back to life. You sit up slowly. The floorboards beneath your feet are freezing. People often kept clothing beside beds overnight because bedrooms became so cold by morning. And despite the hardships, despite the crowded housing and endless work, there were still routines that made life feel familiar, predictable. A kettle running slowly over weak firelight, boots drying beside hearths, someone combing their hair beside a tiny cracked mirror. Ordinary rituals repeated every single day. Human beings survive through routine more than we realize, especially during uncertain times. Outside the window, fog drifts softly between buildings. Victorian streets early in the morning probably smelled like wet stone, coal smoke, fresh bread, horse leather, and chimney ash. The city waking gradually, piece by piece. A bakery door opening somewhere nearby. A milk cart arriving quietly before sunrise. Workers pulling coats tighter against the cold. There's something deeply atmospheric about imagining old mornings, especially rainy ones. Gas lamps still burning weakly while daylight slowly takes their place. Street sweepers brushing mud and ash into piles. Shopkeepers unlocking wooden doors. Tiny warm pockets of life scattered through endless grey streets. And perhaps this is one of the reasons people romanticize history more than ever. Not because the past was easier, often it was much harder, but because slower lives feel emotionally different. People waited more, walked more, noticed where they more carefully, lived closer to silence. Even boredom had a different listening safely from beside a fire, watching droplets race down windows. The psychology of rain seems strangely timeless. It softens the world, makes rooms feel smaller and warmer, encourages stillness. Perhaps that's why rainy nighttime ambience still comforts people now. Some feelings survive every century unchanged. Eventually, afternoon arrives once again, and with it, the familiar rhythm of work. Machines turning endlessly, hands repeating the same motions, conversations drifting softly between exhaustion. Victorian life for the poor required resilience. Modern people can barely imagine sometimes, but resilience does not always look dramatic. Often it looks quiet. A mother repairing clothing late at night, a worker continuing through winter sickness, someone sharing bread even when they have little themselves. History is filled with these invisible acts of endurance, and perhaps those quiet moments deserve remembering most. As evening slowly approaches again, the city softens. Fog returns gradually beneath gas lamps. Shops close one by one. Factory whistles fall silent, and rainwater reflects golden light across dark streets once more. You walk home slowly through the familiar neighborhood, past warm bakery windows, past crowded taverns glowing softly in the rain, past tiny apartments where candles flicker behind curtains. And despite everything, despite the exhaustion, the cold, the uncertainty of Victorian life, there's still beauty here. Not perfect beauty, not storybook beauty, but ordinary beauty, human beauty, the beauty of tired people carrying warmth carefully through difficult worlds. You step quietly back into the small room. The fire crackles softly. Someone nearby yawns sleepily. The kettle begins heating again. And outside, rain taps gently against glass as night settles over the city for another time. The same rhythms repeating, again and again. And somehow, that repetition feels comforting, like the slow turning of pages in an old book, like the ticking of distant clocks, like knowing that across history, ordinary people continue finding small ways to make difficult lives feel softer. And tonight, as your own room grows quieter, you drift once more beside candlelight and rain, through fog and covered Victorian streets, rolling bakeries before dawn, soft train whistles, and tiny glowing windows in the dark, until the entire city slowly fades into sleep again. And now, the city grows quieter one final time. The wind has softened to an occasional gentle tapping against rooftops. Gas lamps glow faintly through the fog, like distant little stars suspended above empty streets. Somewhere far away, a final carriage rolls slowly across wet cobblestones before disappearing into the night. And tucked inside tiny apartments across Victorian England, candles are being extinguished one by one, rooms fading softly into darkness, families sleeping beneath patched blankets, workers resting tired hands after long days, children dreaming quietly while rain drifts against old windows. The city finally rests, and perhaps that's the strange comforting thing about history. For all the differences, for all the years between us, people have always ended their days in similar ways, searching for warmth, searching for softness, searching for rest. A small room